you're not changing the subject. I know you want to change the subject.
No, I want to ask
because you don't want to talk about Trudeau's carbon tax.
When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister? The Prime Minister does not take responsibility for the extremism that he has funded. This from a guy who, if he were made of chocolate, he would eat himself.
At the end of 2024, everything was right in the world for Pierre Poilievre. His Conservatives held a massive lead in national polling that just kept getting bigger, as Canadians increasingly turned their back on Justin Trudeau, and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh failed to gain any traction. But then, all at once, everything changed. Justin Trudeau resigned, Donald Trump took office and immediately began attacking Canada's sovereignty and economic stability. New potential Liberal leadership candidates agreed with Poilievre on a number of policy points that had been the foundation of his platform. Pierre Poilievre, who had made his bid for Prime Minister on the back of attacking and embarrassing Justin Trudeau at every opportunity, suddenly had to convince Canadians that he was much more than just a partisan brawler, but that he could be a leader. So who is Pierre Poilievre? Does his reputation as a conservative attack dog tell the whole story? And in this complicated new landscape, can he still become Prime Minister? Poilievre was born to a 16-year-old mother who gave him up for adoption. He was adopted by 2 school teachers. His early years taught him that the support of family and community were the best social safety nets anyone could have. Poilievre grew up in Calgary in the 80s, during the time of Pierre Elliott Trudeau's National Energy Program. The NEP was an attempt to increase energy security and production in Canada in response to 2 oil crises in the 70s. It was a deeply controversial policy, especially in Alberta, where it has been blamed for massively increasing unemployment and bankruptcy rates. The policy has also been connected to the rise of the right-wing Populist Reform Party. Poilievre's family was affected. They had to sell their home and move because soaring interest rates in the province made it unaffordable. There's something poetic about the fact that about 40 years later, Poilievre would be in a showdown with Pierre Elliott's son as the self-proclaimed populist leader of Canada's right-wing party. Poilievre became involved in politics early and never looked back. As a teen, he was canvassing for local Conservatives. At 20, he won $10,000 in an If I Were Prime Minister essay contest where he laid out his vision for a small government and a free country. Amazingly, a lot of what he wrote about then is still what he believes now, which you can read either as a man who has stuck to his convictions or a man who has refused to adapt with the times. In university, Poilievre worked as a political staffer for Jason Kenney before he became premier, and then he worked with Stockwell Day on campus outreach. By the time he was 24, Poilievre was running for office, and he was an elected MP by age 25. And that is where he has stayed for the past 20 years. With the exception of a brief stint working in collections for TELUS, Poilievre's only job is politics. From the very beginning of his political career, Poilievre constructed a public persona that he has leaned into over time, and one that differs greatly from how people talk about him behind closed doors. In public, whether it be on the House floor, at an event, or in an interview, Poilievre is relentlessly partisan, aggressive, sometimes belligerent and condescending. He became known for his partisan attacks. Poilievre worked for Stephen Harper for years, and his job often consisted of being sicked on opponents who needed to be publicly criticized or sent a strongly worded letter. Poilievre gained a reputation for not backing down, for sticking to his talking points and making every issue as partisan as possible in order to strengthen his own position and detract from his opponents. Some reporters have commented that they tried to avoid talking to Poilievre on the record. As soon as the camera comes out, he goes into partisan mode, and any nuanced conversation is gone. It took him years to hone this. As a young man, it sometimes got him into trouble, like when he criticized Stephen Harper for reparations around residential schools, saying Canadians were not getting good value for all this money, and that instead, we need to engender the values of hard work and independence and self-reliance. He apologized the next day in the House of Commons. Despite this public nature, behind the scenes, Poilievre is allegedly much different. One of his first appointments was as the parliamentary secretary to John Baird, who was president of the Treasury Board at the time. They were tasked with drafting the Federal Accountability Act. John Baird praised his ability to work with NDP MPs on compromises, getting some of them to cross the aisle in order to get the bill signed. Throughout his career, those who have worked closely with Poilievre have said that behind closed doors, he's thoughtful, humble, and open to compromise. That he's often the first to accept a new idea or present a new thought to be debated. But he also got into politics just as the social media revolution was getting underway. Some of those who have known him for years say that Poilievre has learned how to perfect the soundbite, a moment that can be shared widely across social media. In doing so, he's made a compromise, that he doesn't always communicate the nuance and context of an issue, in exchange for getting people to listen.
The economic vandalism and carbon tax cover-up of this government has now been exposed.
Which is what made him the perfect choice when the Conservatives were looking for a new leader in 2022. Everyday Canadians were struggling, Trudeau was mired by scandals and controversy. All Poilievre had to do was take some ammunition out of his well-stocked bag, aim it at Trudeau, and do what he had been doing for 20 years. Fire away. But when Trudeau resigned, it revealed the biggest weakness of Poilievre's chosen persona. In the absence of a clear enemy, what did Poilievre actually believe in? The Conservative website doesn't have a platform on it. That will likely be posted once the official election campaign begins. But it says that Poilievre believes in a country where the state is servant, not master, where smaller government makes room for bigger citizens, where people have the freedom to build a business without red tape and heavy tax. None of that really means anything on its own, but it gives you an idea of where he's coming from. To get the best idea of what Poilievre believes in, we can look at the essay he wrote when he was 20 years old, since according to Poilievre, he hasn't really changed his opinions since then. In his essay, Poilievre says that a big government simply gets in the way of individuals using their creativity, ingenuity, and hard work to achieve success. Individuals should be able to take home their pay without losing too much of it to income tax. He lays out a 3-step tax plan. He would completely eliminate the capital gains tax and corporate subsidies, raise the personal exemption on income tax to benefit the working poor, and apply a program that would raise the exemption based on economic growth in the country. He would reduce EI premiums, returning any surplus to workers and employers. And in order to pay for the drastic loss in tax revenue, he would cut social services. As he says in his essay about what he would cut, it would be, quote, impractical to name all of these items here. The list would be too long. He says all of this will result in higher wages, more money left in individuals' pockets, and the poor and unemployed will try harder. Ironically, one of Poilievre's final points is that, quote, politics should not be a lifelong career, and elected officials should not be allowed to fix themselves in the halls of power of a nation. If they're permitted to do so, politicians will devote their time to finding ways to perpetuate their own power, as opposed to building on the freedom of their country. He then proposes a 2-term limit for members of parliament. Now, whether or not you agree with this approach, this is an actual platform with actual plans. And all I had to do was track down an essay he wrote when he was 20 years old. Today, Poilievre reiterates his talking points of fixing the housing crisis, cutting taxes, axing the carbon tax, and making Canada more free. But the details of how he is going to do most of those things are vague at best. He often finds ways to blame these problems on the Liberals, and certainly some of it is their fault, and contends that he would fix them as Prime Minister. One of the biggest issues with the things that Poilievre focuses on is that he either A, wouldn't actually be able to fix them as Prime Minister, or B, they aren't actually issues. Let me explain. Poilievre has spent years painting a picture of how Justin Trudeau is personally responsible for the housing crisis. But the housing crisis is an extremely complicated issue. Trudeau's federal government was the first in decades to take such a hands-on role in housing. Typically, housing has been left to provinces and municipalities. Many provinces are still the roadblock to building more houses because of not in my backyard sentiments, red tape, and a host of other things. Certainly, the federal government has some impact on this, and whether or not Trudeau could have done a better job is absolutely a legitimate question to ask. But Poilievre as Prime Minister could not simply wave a magic wand, remove the red tape, and get houses built. If it were that simple, even Trudeau would have done it. Poilievre has also convinced many Canadians that the cost of their groceries, bills, rent payments, everything under the sun are due to the carbon tax. Extensive analysis has revealed that yes, holistically the carbon tax does cost Canadians more than they get back on their rebates. However, when compared with many other factors, it is an extremely small amount, responsible for about 0.5% of inflation. That's not to say axing the tax isn't a good idea. That's up to you to decide. But what it does mean is that if Poilievre is elected and axes the tax, groceries and bills will still be expensive. The same can be said of pipelines, of interprovincial trade barriers, of various taxes. The federal government has an impact on these things, but many of them are provincial issues. The point is, Poilievre very well may vault himself to Prime Minister on the back of pointing out everything that's wrong with the country and blaming it on Justin Trudeau. But if and when he becomes Prime Minister, he will be unable to simply fix the things he says he is going to fix. And for those things he can change, like the carbon tax, they will not have the impact on improving the lives of everyday Canadians that he has said they will have. This could result in some interesting responses from voters, who have been promised the world but are not seeing the changes they expected. This is the limiting factor in the persona Poilievre has chosen. When your campaign is based off of blaming the other guy, any decision the Liberals make has to be objectively the wrong one. That leaves only one clear policy choice. Whatever you do, make sure it's the opposite of what the Liberals did. And what we can see, by listening closely, reading 20-year-old essays, and examining his career, is that Poilievre intends to make aggressive and sweeping tax cuts that can only be paid for by absolutely gutting social services. That very well may be something that voters want, but will he actually communicate that? Or will voters potentially elect him on the back of housing and the carbon tax simply to watch social services they rely on be cut across the board? And this is where the irony of Poilievre's position as a populist comes in. Poilievre is not a rags to riches story. He's not an entrepreneur who built a business from the ground up and found wealth after years of hardship. He's been a politician since he was 25. Him and his wife own several rental properties. He has a net worth in the tens of millions of dollars. For all that the Conservatives have criticized Jagmeet Singh for delaying an election in order to get his pension, Poilievre has had his pension since he was 31. Today, he qualifies for a pension of over $200,000 a year. Poilievre has become objectively wealthy because of tax dollars that have paid his salary and given him a pension many of us can only dream of, while never holding a quote-unquote real job. Yet we are to believe that Poilievre understands working folks, that he's a man of the people, and not an elite like other politicians who are poorer than him. My point is not that Poilievre is an elite while the other politicians aren't, it's that they're all elites. Expecting a politician not to be wealthy is like expecting rain not to be wet. The Conservatives saw a substantial dip in polling in the wake of Trump's threats and Trudeau's resignation. They held internal surveys to see if they needed to adjust their messaging, but their approach hasn't changed. In several speeches in response to Trump's tariffs, Poilievre stumbles over policy points, reciting them from a sheet of paper in a numbered list, almost as if he's bored. But when it comes to the part of the speech, which is the bulk of the speech I might add, where he can attack Trudeau or Mark Carney, he lights up. Even on the day when Trump finally followed through on the threatened tariffs, Poilievre recited a speech he had already given, barely touching on Trump at all, but pointing the finger at the Liberals over and over again.
But none of these things have happened in the last 100 days since Trump first launched his tariff threats. Look behind me. Parliament has been closed. Liberals shut it down to focus on their political battles.
For a time, that approach was not resonating at all, as the Conservatives lost nearly a 30-point lead in the polls. But recent polling suggests that dip may have been temporary, as the Conservatives have managed to distance themselves from Trump and find new angles to attack Mark Carney, regaining a significant lead in some polls. It all begs the question, can Poilievre do anything else? Attack ads have always been part of Canadian politics, but more and more it seems that Poilievre is entirely unable or unwilling to stand on his own 2 feet, to stand behind something that he believes in, rather than to simply stand in opposition to his opponent. That may be all well and good in normal times, but Canada is facing a threat it hasn't seen since maybe World War II. Can Poilievre be the leader the country needs to create a bright and hopeful future? For many voters in this upcoming election, it will certainly be enough that he's not the Liberals. But despite how he presents himself, Poilievre is much smarter than all this. By all accounts behind the scenes, he's spent decades becoming more and more conservative, honing an approach to conservative politics that largely ignores the cultural aspects and embraces the traditional values of small government, conservative fiscal policy, and individual freedoms. If elected, he's certain to cut taxes, slash social services, give power to the private sector, and work towards a smaller government. But what is being obscured behind Poilievre's partisanship is just how aggressive that approach will likely be. For how conservative Harper was, Poilievre and some of his colleagues formed a private committee when they worked for Harper, whose primary job was to see how much more conservative Harper could be. Poilievre's approach to small government would likely be the most aggressive we have ever seen in Canada. And the question is he obscuring that because he doesn't think it would be popular, using a dislike of liberal politics as a Trojan horse so that he can make those changes once he's been elected? Or has he simply not played his hand yet? But this changing political landscape, despite all of the anxieties and issues it creates, may be what Canada needs. The 2025 election has changed from a resounding rebuke of nearly 10 years of Justin Trudeau to a referendum on the future of a country that's been asleep at the wheel for a decade. Can Pierre Poilievre communicate a vision of that future in a way that resonates with Canadians? And if not, that may tell us even more about whether Canadians value partisanship over policy. In short, which Poilievre will win out? The thoughtful, compromising politician, or the relentless attack dog he has chosen to be? Will he tell Canadians what he intends to do to taxes and social services, or continue to blame problems he cannot fix on the Liberals, hoping our division will give him the country's highest office?